Good evening. Today is May 3rd, 2024. I hope everybody's been having a good day. And I want to talk today about an important Supreme Court case that occurred on exactly 70 years ago. Now, the month of May 1954 was a very important event in history, especially in legal history. Two very important civil rights cases were handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court. The more famous was Brown versus Board of Education, May 17, 1954. But there was another very important case decided exactly 2 years earlier, on May 3rd, 1954, Hernandez versus Texas. These two decisions appear back to back in U.S. reports. Whereas the Brown decision dealt with African Americans in attending public schools, the Hernandez decision dealt with justice for Mexican Americans in the jury selection process. It was on August the 4th of 1951, Pedro, better known as Pete Hernandez, a migrant cotton picker, shot and killed a tenant farmer named Joe Espinoza at the Chincho Sanchez's Tavern, located in Sprung's Grocery in Edna, Texas, a small town in Jackson County. Now, it was a barroom brawl involving two Mexican Americans. And on the surface, it may not have anything to do with civil rights, or so people would think, but it actually did. Peter Hernandez was club-footed, very severely handicapped. And while they were drinking in the bar that night, Joe Espinoza said to Pete, "The way you look, man, no woman would ever want you." Well, that made Pete mad. He went home, got his gun, and came and murdered Joe Espinoza. There were eyewitnesses. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that Pete Hernandez was guilty as could be. It didn't take long for him to be tried, found guilty, and given a life imprisonment. End of case, right? No. It was soon discovered that for 25 years leading up to that, no person with a Spanish surname had served on a jury in Jackson County. And it was revealed about the discrimination in jury selection. A very experienced civil rights lawyer, Gustavo Gus Garcia, agreed to represent the accused pro bono, in other words, without fee. Garcia envisioned the Hernandez case as a challenge to the systematic exclusion of persons of Mexican origin from all types of jury duty in at least 70 counties in Texas. It was not surprising to him when Hernandez was found guilty, and the decision was upheld by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. He filed a writ of certiorari, and the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to hear the arguments on January 11th, 1954. Now, of the bukus of writs of certiorari that are filed, only a small percentage actually are heard. The court has wide latitude as to what cases they will and will not hear. Along with Garcia were James Deanda and Chris Alderete of the American GI Forum, and Carlos Cadena and John Jace Herrera of the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC. Those who administered the process of jury selection introduced discrimination because the exclusion was based on class. The state of Texas contended the 14th Amendment covered only whites and blacks. You know, if they got only two classes, white and black, where do Mexican Americans fit? Well, technically they were considered white. In other words, you got a Mexican defendant in an all-Anglo jury. It's a jury of one's peers. Right? Wrong. The state admitted that no person with a Spanish surname had served on any type of jury in Jackson County for 25 years. But this absence only indicated coincidence, they claimed, not a pattern of attitude and behavior. And Garcia and his associates presented comprehensive evidence that in Jackson County, discrimination and segregation were common practice, that Mexican Americans were treated as a class apart. And that's a fact they had to establish. Now, at that time, early 1950s, you think there were very many wealthy Mexicans in Texas? Not too many. Quite a few worked as laborers on some of the lowest paid jobs of all. It costs a lot of money to get a case before the Supreme Court. And it costs money for anybody to travel to Washington, D.C. So what'd they do? They had dinners. They had dances. They sold tons of tamales in order to raise the money to send the legal team to D.C. On May 3rd, 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Pete Hernandez's favor. Chief Justice Earl Warren delivered the unanimous opinion, ordered a reversal of conviction. Warren wrote the petitioner's initial burden of substantiating his charge of group discrimination was to prove that persons of Mexican descent constitute a separate class in Jackson County, distinct from whites. Until very recent times, children of Mexican descent were required to attend a segregated school for the first 4 grades. At least one restaurant in town prominently displayed a sign announcing no Mexicans served. On the courthouse grounds at the time of the hearing, there were 2 men's toilets, one unmarked, and that was for white men, the other marked colored men and hombres aquí, in other words, men here. His only claim is the right to be indicted and tried by juries from which all members of his class are not systematically excluded. Jury selected from among all qualified persons, regardless of national origin or descent. To this much he is entitled by the Constitution. Okay, he won the case. What next? November 15th, 1954, Pete Hernandez was retried, this time by a jury that included 2 Mexicans. Well, the evidence was there. Nobody disputed that he did the act of murder. He was again found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. On June 8th, 1960, due to the lobbying efforts of Gus Garcia, Hernandez was paroled and released by order of Governor Price Daniel. Gus wrote a letter to his client saying, "We all make mistakes in this life, Pete. Yours was a terrible one. I want you to hold that temper of yours in check. If you feel that you're starting to get mad, just think of all those long years in jail and in prison and run. Don't walk away from the trouble. Hernandez worked as a prison barber and may have cut hair in Port Lavaca, Texas after release. It is reported that he died sometime during the 1970s, but no death certificate, obituary, or other record has been found. So he just disappeared from the face of the earth from all indications. It's very unlikely he's still living today, but we have no proof of his death. Most of the lawyers in the case had outstanding legal careers. Carlos Cadena became a state judge. James DeAnda became a federal judge. And here is the saddest part of the story. The lead counsel, Gus Garcia, a very brilliant legal mind, suffered from alcoholism and mental illness. He lost his law license. He went through a divorce. He had numerous admissions to mental institutions. In 1964, at the age of 48, he died of liver failure, and his body was found on a park bench in San Antonio. Apparently, he had been dead for several hours before anybody noticed. Here is a picture of the cover from the book Colored Men and Hombres Aquí. And on the cover is Pete Hernandez with two of his attorneys. On January 25th, 2024, the State Bar of Texas Hispanic Issues section held a panel discussion in person and broadcast by way of Zoom at St. Mary's School of Law in San Antonio to commemorate the 70th anniversary of Hernandez versus Texas. Chief Justice Dory Contreras of the 13th Texas Court of Appeals, Justice Gina Benavides of the 13th Texas Court of Appeals, and Justice David M. Medina, retired from the Texas Supreme Court, participated in the panel discussion moderated by Hispanic Issues section moderator, or the chair and State of Bar of Texas Director, Chris Pineda. The panelists discussed the experience of Mexican Americans in Texas at the time, the attorneys and parties involved, Hernandez's legal team strategy, and the impact of the legacy of the case. The panel discussion was held at St. Mary's School of Law before an audience of law students, judges, lawyers, and members of the public. It was also broadcast live to an online audience of nearly 200 people watching from across the state and country. To kick off the event, HIS Chair Angelica Hernandez, State Bar of Texas President Cindy Tisdale, and St. Mary's School of Law Dean Patricia Roberts gave introductory remarks and talked about the importance of the Hernandez case. Additionally, prior to the panel, St. Mary's hosted a small luncheon with the panelists, officers, and members of the Carlos Cardenas family who came to show their support for the event. Hispanic Issues section, that is HIS, was honored to recognize the legacy of this case and the brilliant Texas lawyers who crafted and argued the legal merits, said Angelica Hernandez. Our hope is that the story that originated in Edna, Texas is never forgotten, that future lawyers are inspired to reach the same legal heights for the betterment of our state and nation. HIS thanks its sponsoring coordinating partners. And also, it is my understanding that the Texas Bar Association will hold their convention June the 20th through the 24th in Dallas. And there'll be some commemoration at that time of this very far-reaching civil rights case, Hernandez versus Texas. And so racial discrimination in jury selection or anything else is wrong. And that was one thing that was driven home 70 years ago by Hernandez versus Texas. Have a good weekend, everyone.